Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is David Jacobs. I'm Vice Commodore of the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia and Chair of the Sailing Committee. It's my great pleasure on behalf of the club to welcome you tonight. We have tonight not only the people in this room, online we have about 500 people, and we are also broadcasting this to 4 yacht clubs, the Southport Yacht Club, the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania, the Sandringham Yacht Club, and the Downwind Sailing Squadron. And it's a great pleasure to welcome those clubs and their participation in this evening, and hello to their members. Why are we running this evening tonight? Following the tragic loss of the 2 lives at the last Hobart Yacht Race, we commissioned a report, a review, which was carried out by the retired Rear Admiral Chris Oxenbould AO, the celebrated navigator Adrian Cahalan OAM, and by the very credentialed David Jordan, CSC. Accidental jibes significantly contributed to those 2 events, and the recommendation was that we should run a seminar on downwind sailing. And the sheer participation of people tonight has proved the wisdom of that recommendation. This is the first of a series of information nights that the Cruising Yacht Club of Australia will be running. They will be mostly focused on offshore, and there will be some inshore as well. The sort of topics that we will be running: communications, particularly satellite phones, seamanship, preparing your boat for an offshore race, navigation and charts, when things go wrong, stories and lessons of offshore racing, racing tactics on Sydney Harbour, and the racing rules of sailing. Everybody is welcome to join these information nights. We'll be running them pretty much monthly. Our interest is contributing to not only safety and not only enjoyment, but the growth of our sport. And we hope that these information nights will contribute to all of those 3 objectives. So let me introduce our panellists and our moderator. It seems that we're working on colour names, Brownie and Greenie. Jack said that he doesn't have a colour name. I did think for a minute that one of the members here told me that the wind hit today 45 knots at Fort Dennis, and maybe we should have just taken you all out and given you a sort of practical session. So let's start with Adam Brown. Adam's only done 35 Hobart races. He's an offshore racing specialist. He's had 3 victories in the Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race. On Ragamuffin, Quest and Balance. He's raced on the Sword of Orion, and he is known to be a real expert in this area. Next we have Jack, youngest of the 3. Jack is a 2-time Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht winner and is an around-the-world sailor. Heavy weather specialist on the helm, and some would say that he was very instrumental in Sam winning last year's Hobart. Would that be right, Sam? Yep. And then finally we have, but not last, Mike Green, or Greenie, as everyone refers to him. Greenie's done 44 Hobart races, 2 Admiral Cup campaigns and 3 Kenwood Cups. He's described as one of the best offshore sailing masters, so we've got a tremendous panel here. And they will be moderated by our Commodore, Sam Haynes. Sam is a seasoned offshore sailor and a yacht owner. Of the many wins that Sam has enjoyed, I think probably the 2 most treasured is his win of the Rolex Sydney Hobart Yacht Race in 2022 and last year. Last year, he won by the largest margin since Rani won it in 1945, so there was a long time between drinks. Sam will moderate a discussion with the panel and will then take questions both from the floor and online. But with so many people, we won't be able to answer every question, and we seek your indulgence on that. A few just admin issues before we start. First of all, liability questions. We are sharing experiences with you. The panel is not providing advice. Each boat behaves differently. Each circumstance that a boat finds itself in is different, and the ultimate decision on safety is up to the skipper. So, as us lawyers would say, the panellist, the moderator and the club take no responsibility for anything said tonight, any representation or any warranty, and we deny all liability whatsoever. We will finish tonight at 8 o'clock, and for those who are hungry not just for information but for food, shoot straight downstairs and place your order. Now, Sam, over to you.
Great, thanks David. I've got a sort of a set of questions here, but very quickly, I think just to start. Obviously, these gentlemen here are known for various different sorts of sailing, but particularly we want to make sure we do cover all types of boats. We're not just looking at asymmetric type planing hull sailing. We're looking at all the aspects of sailing from displacement boats with symmetric setups through to the first mentioned, and we have experience in all of those areas from these three gentlemen. Thanks a lot for volunteering to come along. Firstly, I might just ask a little bit of background. Greenie, do you want to just give us a bit of an idea about a couple of different boats you've sailed on and how long you've been involved and so forth?
Thanks, Sam. Yeah, it is working. Yes, I flicked the switch. I suppose I'm here to represent the old fart side of the sailing. I have sailed offshore boats since 1977, so I've gone through the IOR stage, through the IMS and now the IRC and what have you. So the boats have varied greatly through my 44 Hobarts. What else can I tell you? I've sailed with some absolutely fantastic owners. I first started running boats for Andrew Strachan, Satin Sheets, 97. 97 claim to fame was to get the line honours of the Sydney to Hobart in 1993. Then I came to sail with Warren Johns in the one-tonners beyond Thunderdome, and then went on to go with Andy Strachan again back on 97, then with Bobby Steele, and I've been running Bob's boats through the Quest era, and then went on with to get 2 wins with him, thank God, and then along with Paul Clitheroe on the Balance. So I've been running those boats for them on the water. I don't pretend to prepare the boats or anything like that, but my expertise has been always as somebody who pushes boats hard and steers them hard.
Brownie, want to give us a bit of an idea about your background as well?
I guess I bring up the middle-aged category marginally. I'm chasing Greenie like there's no tomorrow. But my sailing started really in the offshore stuff in 1984 on a downhill sled called Rampant 2, and I was raised next door to the Royal Sydney Yacht Squadron, so I had a lot of etchel and soling and laser experience in those days. Jumped into 18-foot skiffs, but just had a passion for offshore racing. And then 84 Hobart, 86 Hobart, before the age limit had actually kicked in with my old man, and really enjoyed it. Then I jumped on with a Queenslander called Sir Robbo, who's actually not really knighted, but he will tell you he is, and did quite a bit of mileage with him on the half-tonners, one-tonners and quarter-tonners as well. And then followed a bit of a program with what they called the Jog series in those days. And then ended up with Sid Fisher for all my sins. And but what Sid did is he paved the way for me big time into offshore racing. And so I did quite a bit of mileage with him, George Snow, Bob Steele, Paul Clitheroe, and most recently with the Gualo team. And I'm finishing up at the moment with the Antipodes, the Santa Cruz 72 for this year's Hobart, and thoroughly enjoying it.
And Jack, give us a bit of a background on you.
Thanks, boss. So I grew up on Sydney Hobart, really, in suburbs, flying 11s, 29ers, and then 18s. In my 20s, I spent a lot of time mucking around in the 18s, not taking it that seriously, and did my first race offshore on the Brindabella, actually. I probably took your spot, Brownie, but And yeah, at that stage of my life, I wasn't that interested in it. I found it pretty boring because I didn't really have a role on the boat. I was just a dog's body up in the bow, and didn't find it that interesting. So I took a hiatus, and then about 10 years later, I started sailing with David Witt on the Ragamuffin, funnily enough, and spent, I think it was 6 years with Sid, and a remarkable guy, hard but remarkable. And yeah, so that was from the TP52 through to the 90 and the 100, some great times, and then that flowed into the Scallywag 100 with Whitty and SH, and obviously the Volvo, and then stars aligned and I hung out with Sam. So, you know, that's the nuts and bolts of it. But yeah, growing up on Sydney Harbor, and yeah, love my sailing.
So I've done quite a lot of, you know, hard downwind sailing with Jack on the helm. Just wanted to sort of ask you, Jack, what sort of things are you? What's your kind of loop in your head as you're sailing in, you know, say, hard running conditions like last year's Hobart, and yeah, just sort of a bit of an idea about that.
Sure, straight into it. So yeah, you know, in a driving role, and specifically talking about that, and not what goes before that in preparation and dealing with the rest of the team and what you do. It's a rhythm that you've got to get into, and it's a balance between safety and performance, and getting that balance right is difficult. You know, it's depends on the crew around you, the type of boat, the experience, the amount of practice, all these different things. So finding that rhythm is key, and the tools that I use when I step up onto the wheel is the key one is angle of heel. That's the one that I always talk about, particularly in the middle of the night when you can't see much, you're wet, you're cold, you're tired. What do you use as you know your intuition? What do you look for? And for me, it's angle of heel of the boat, because that tells you what power zone you're in, and then you know you can then cycle through the numbers that you can see on the mast if you can still see. You know I'm getting old, but it's you know, you're looking at the true wind speed, your heading, true wind angle, and you're trying to find a happy balance, a safe zone where the boat's comfortable. So you know, if I talk about last year's race, in the middle of the night it was getting windier and windier. You know, if we're talking 25 to 35 knots of wind, you know, it spikes, then you're looking at what's the safe true wind angle with the sails that you've got up. Is it 155? And then, you know, what's the margin of error? Is it 152 to 160? Is it, you know, how much scope have you got to play with that? And tying that into the wave state. And, you know, as we know, offshore here, the waves get steep and sharp. They're not big, beautiful rolling waves that you can surf for miles and miles. It's you're into the back of the next wave pretty fast. So you're looking at the angle into the back of the wave, you know, as you're surfing, and that entry into the back of the wave is pretty critical. So it's that rhythm of cycling through the numbers, finding that angle of heel, balancing the two out, talking to your trimmers, you know, letting them ease the sheets at the right time and release the load. And, you know, it's a bit of a symphony. You know, if you've got to talk and communicate and find that balance, and, you know, weave your way through the waves and the mess, and find the balance. Yeah. Yeah,
so, I mean, we're talking here very much, it sounds like we're talking about sort of asymmetric sailing on a planing boat or fast boats. And if you're going to the report, Porco Rosso, you know, they were, and this is something which I guess is applicable to controlling a fast boat, as you're actually hitting into the waves. So they had a wave broach come over the boat and washed the helm off his station, and then lost control of the boat, which ended up causing an accidental jibe just because the boat was out of control because of a wave that they hit. And this is in last year's race. Obviously, it's dead of night. It's very dark, very, very little visibility. Tonight we've got a beautiful full moon. It'll be a different case, right? But just going to angle of heel at night in the dark, is there any sort of tips on how we can, you know, manage that? I mean, especially when you get down to lower towards Tasmania, it gets very much the loom. There's very little horizon. How do you guys look at that? Maybe someone else could give an answer to that. The safe zone.
The first thing I look for when you're starting to get into those situations is I make everybody take their hoods off. you've got to use the senses that God gave you. The balance of your ears. You, as a helmsman and as crew on board the boat, you can feel that change of pressure coming. And as Jack mentioned, your sense of balance, your sense of heel of angle is just so vitally important. And anybody who's going to sail a boat, whether it be hard downwind, and as Craig will attest, my angle of heel calls when I've been talking to him when he's doing his helming is the most important thing in any downwind, upwind situation. And you can only have those senses if you've got your hood off. If we learn one thing, is don't take away God's gifts of your ears, your eyes and your balance by putting a piece of bloody cloth around you.
Looking at, that you mentioned the crew working together, trimming the boat and so forth. What about the sort of the feedback loop? What does that look like on a boat when it's ready in, these sort of conditions, Brownie?
Yeah, I think constant feedback. It should be always communication between the helmsman and the trimmers. The trimmers will, by default, always feel the pressure before the helmsman does because they're on the end of the sheet. So they can talk to the helmsman. But equally, from a helming point of view, if the boat's overpowered, then it's up to the helmsman to communicate that back to the trimmers in reverse. One of the things I want to concentrate on just a little bit, because I could repeat exactly what the two boys have said already, but one of the things I think we forget in sailing is the fundamentals of the physics of what we're actually trying to achieve. And what we're really trying to achieve is we're trying to achieve an aeronautical foils and aquatic foils to work in harmony with each other and to balance out the high and the low pressure cells within that configuration. So if sailing is hard, well then it shouldn't be. And part of that reason why that is hard is because the boat is in balance between the high pressures and the low pressures. And I talk about it all the time to anyone who ever asks me. It's a constant battle. So, you look at your telltales and you say, okay, why is the outside telltales flapping around? It's because there's a huge low pressure behind that sail. And that low pressure will load the boat up 100%. The automatic response to that is to actually turn the helm against that low pressure, which means you're actually exacerbating another low pressure in the aquatic sense with the rudder turning hard. So all of a sudden what you're doing is you're actually fighting the boat, or you're fighting the conditions, or you're fighting the situation. What you really want to do is you want to try and sail the boat like it's on railway tracks, where everything is parallel as much as possible. So there's old adages, if in doubt, let it out. There's, keep the rudder in line, straighten up. If you broach, for example, so many people I see with the helm hard over trying to get themselves out of a broach. But if you let the rudder straighten up, let the water flow over the top of the rudder equally on both sides, the boat will speed up and you pick your time to bear away. But I think it's really important to concentrate with both asymmetrical and symmetrical spinnakers as to why those situations or why these issues unfold, and it's because of that high and low pressure. When you see a symmetrical boat, and I'll just concentrate on symmetrical because we haven't really touched on it, but when you see what they call a death roll in symmetrical boats, it's because that low pressure cell is moving around the outside of the spinnaker and the mainsail. And the reason for that is that the air is travelling faster around the outside of the sail than it is on the inside of the sail. And so by flattening that sail out, that spinnaker out, what that does, it slows the speed of the air away from the outside of the sail and makes it more balanced with the inside of the sail. So for example, with your sailing symmetrical, the old far 40s, Greenie would remember, Jack, you wouldn't have done too much of it back in the day, but they used to roll all over the time, and the best way to try and reduce that roll was tweakers. I know some of you don't sail with tweakers anymore, but tweakers down, sheet on, pole back, and flatten that sail, and all of a sudden you'll end up with some control, because it's all to do with that high and low pressure cell. So same with an asymmetrical spinnaker. If is going fast and it gets buried in the bottom of a wave because you're going fast and it can't accelerate through the next wave, that low pressure is going to very quickly move round to the outside of the spinnaker, and that is potentially going to drive the sail downwards and rudder out of the water and turn into potentially a broach. The other thing I want to just talk on physics, and not that I'm a scientist by any means, but the sailboard is a very, very basic example of how things work in a sailing situation, and a lot of people don't pay attention to actually how a sailboard works. So if you want to go downwind on a windsurfer, you tilt the mast forward. And if you tilt the mast forward, the bow will bear away. If you actually want to go upwind, you tilt the mast aft and the board will go upwind. To the extent if you keep tilting the mast aft, the board will actually turn into a tack and come out the other side. And that's with no rudder at all. So they're the real physics and the real basics of sailing. And I think what we've got to do is teach people that is the case and how to counteract those situations.
Just so I can get a bit of an idea from the room, obviously online we can't see people, but here, who are sailing symmetric boats in general in this sort of conditions? And then asymmetric, just the same sort of, yeah, so roughly it's a 50-50 kind of, and that's what we would expect, I suppose, from looking at our fleet. Yeah. I think one of the kind of other points sort of, I mean, we did start here just talking also about the feedback loop and so forth, and great to get those, what you were saying there about the physics of the boat. And that's also something else we'll touch on, which is training and, you know, like getting experience on the boat itself. I mean, there's nothing like actually being able to get the luck to go and have a training day on conditions which then are replicated in a race. And so the more days you train, then the more chance of that to happen there is. Going to go feedback, like we'd be looking at, I guess another aspect of that is like distraction on deck. So if the helm and the main sheet, for instance, are locked in, it's a lot safer than a distraction situation. Just talk about maybe, if you can, how that can be maintained, and then also, for instance, planning a jibe, planning a watch change, and how you manage those sort of circumstances on a boat, particularly passage racing I'm talking. Greenie, you've got some... You're a crew boss, you've been telling people what to do.
Well, yes, well, you know, as far as the communication loop is concerned, that I do seem to be able to yell louder than anybody else and ask them to be quiet. The guys we've been sailing with in the last couple of years have got a lot of experience, and I think I can notice there's a few people who have sailed with me over the years, is that I am a stickler for the volume that comes on the deck. Most probably I'm causing half the problems because I'm a bit louder, but the communication loop must be continuous. As far as preparing for a watch change, if we've done our homework about the weather that's coming, everybody is really ready for a watch anyway. They'll be downstairs with their wet weather gear on, their harnesses on. And as the breeze gets stronger and stronger, and as we talked about the physics that Brownie said, we're moving our weight, our legal weight, further and further aft in the boat so that we can keep the rudder in the water. As soon as the rudder comes up, of course, air flows down the blade and you start to cavitate out. So it has been boats that I run when we get to the stage of breeze being up at 30 knots, true, 35, that everybody's on deck anyway. So we do dispense with a watch system, and we go on to a two-helmsman routine. Brownie happens to be in some of the hard races that we did in 2000, especially 2017, and I will come back to you a bit later to tell you what we did wrong in that race. But we go into that routine of helmsman on, and every helmsman has his own trimmer. Keeping those teams together is vitally important. So Again, we do tend to dispense with a watch routine because we know with all the forecasting we have these days what the breeze is likely to do and over what length of period of time. And the other thing is you know where everybody is. And so does that cover anything that...
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's very, I think another thing I'd ask maybe Jack, what do you think about rotating helms? How often?
Yeah, rotating helms, I think it's specific to each individual team and who you've got on board and who you want to be in the key positions during those moments when it's, heavy downwind sailing. So it comes back to your preparation, really, and having practiced in those conditions and figuring out who's going to be best in what role. And as Greenie said, having those trimmers that work well with you. I know with me, I've got Harry and Louis, and they're my guys. I don't go offshore without them, and they know my driving style and the intricacies that I bring, and so they're able to communicate with me at the right time. And the communication chain goes back to your preparation and going through the potential manoeuvres or the potential wind strengths or sail changes or sails that you're going to be using, and actually, as Greenie said, ticking off those things so that you're not having those conversations in the middle of the night and trying to figure things out. They just know, and you're able to get in the zone, get in the rhythm, and then it's the small things that make the big differences. And it's those little eases at the right time. It's those little reminders. Oh, you're a little bit high at the moment. That's max up or that's max down. Positive communication rather than negative communication. Just all those sorts of things that. It's the simple things, but if you get them right, then you're limiting mistakes. So, yeah, I think the communication, you want it to be concise, particularly in the middle of the night, because it's hard to hear, it's hard to see, and so if you're getting a piece of advice from your trimmers, then you know that you've got to listen. And yeah,
I think I should mention that we kind of obviously are talking a lot about hard downwind sailing in the dead of night. That's sort of the theme that's running here. We will try and cover and talk about other aspects of heavy air sailing, but this is always going to be the point at which I suppose the boats are in their, or the boat and the crew's in their most danger, where boats are moving fast. There's the concern of tipping out or broaching or an accidental jibe, but the worst probable occurrence would be a man overboard, which is the thing that again we saw in this Hobart with a particularly successful man overboard event, which easily could have been different. Steps obviously been taken to have AIS on board for everyone, for the crew, and that's now a compulsory mandatory for our races. Just going to safety, and let's just have a talk about that. You mentioned, Greenie, that when you get to a certain stage, like when you've got 30 to 35 knots, that's a lot of breeze. That's a windy situation running before it. You've got everyone on deck, but there'll be a stage too where I suppose you're getting pinned by your sail plan. You're trying to think about when you're going to get down. Reduce the spinnaker down to maybe a fractional or go down to an A4 or something like that, or go through the stages. What are you doing? Are you doing that at changes of watch? You're trying to do that just when the wind strength comes in? Is there a tactic that you guys would be putting in there for those sort of manoeuvres? And also mentioned the jibe as well. I suppose you're going to plan a jibe when you've got all hands. How do you guys approach that?
Well, as I said, by that stage I'd have everybody up on deck anyway. The sheer terror is going to keep everybody awake and very, very alive.
Let's take it down to, say, 25 knots then.
Well, at 25, first of all, but under the rules, we've got to have harnesses on anyway. And at night time, we're talking about these sorts of things. The crew boss, and I've had the joy of sailing with some very good ones, and have sailed recently with Clinton Evans, who is probably one of the best I've ever sailed with. It's their job to prepare the boat for all that sort of stuff. We're talking the high-speed stuff, our Martin breaker is on. We've already led the, even before any jibes or anything, this is the disaster prevention. We've got the lazy sheet pull through the boom, and it's already led to windward, loaded on a windward winch because we're not actually using that. So we're prepared for anything that eventuates anyway. It's like any good crew, they've got to be 10, 15 minutes in front of the boat and the current situation.
So what you're sort of saying is you always are prepared to take the kite down at all times. It's never going to be... You're at the point where you can get rid of it if necessary for an MOB or
absolutely
something like that.
Yeah, once we get to start getting to these 25 knot breeze strengths, we are always ready. The boat is absolutely prepared for a panic drop. I suppose, you did ask me about preparing for a jibe. Again, it's a lot of chat, and most probably you've got everybody after the helmsman. And what you have to do is make sure that the helmsman is actually going at pace. You cannot go into a jibe without pace. It's the only thing that's going to get you through a jibe safely. So fast jibes, don't wait for the boat to slow down to do a jibe. The faster the boat's going, the better you are likely to come out the other end.
And Brownie, do you want to just talk about jibing on, getting the boat ready for a symmetric? You've got the pole out there. How do you manage that? What's going on?
Yeah. Look, the principles apply for both asymmetrical and symmetrical, but the first thing is, Greeny's already alluded to the fact that there could be rain, hail and shine, hoods are on, people have changed watches, coming up on, half the crew are coming up on deck, half the crew are sort of a bit weary because they've been on deck. That's probably your most dangerous period of time, to be honest, because the movement on the boat and the balance on the boat can throw the whole trim out completely. It takes a while for people to settle into a trim zone and a steering zone before they can feel comfortable. And when there's, on the 52s, there's upwards of 7 or 8 people changing watch at a time. On the symmetrical boats, 4 or 5 at the time. I would suggest that process is taken a bit more gradually and a proper handover done, just like you would hand over anything in your life. You would take the time to do that and prepare the oncoming crew for that scenario. The second thing is the communication. There's a tendency for everyone to start talking, and it breeds complete confusion. In the preparedness and in the practicing that should have been done prior to the race, there should be straightforward processes that the boat follows on a regular basis, and that should be drummed into the crew. If you're going to pull a headsail off the deck or a spinnaker down, it kind of should be the same way each time, rather than reinventing the wheel. The third thing is that making sure that people are in their roles. Obviously, the higher the risk, the more I encourage people to go back to what I call starting positions. In other words, own those roles, because that's where your area of expertise, that's how you got chosen for the crew. And I would also make sure that your lead helmsman are steering the boat, not someone else. So what often happens is someone's steering away and they say, oh, we think we should jibe, and there are, on many occasions, you've got no idea whether that person's experienced enough to take the boat through that jibe process, particularly in heavy air. So why wouldn't you, for the point of safety, go back to your starting positions, have your lead helmsman steer the boat through the jibe, and by all means, once the boat's settled, you can hand that back to the original steerer if need be. But I think you really eliminate that confusion. There's other situations. In the preparedness for jibes, there's lots of things to consider. Outside of just the sail trim, it's important to make sure you've got things like torches on deck. You've got people are strapped on, their centre of effort is low in the boat. They're not, standing around in the middle of a triangle for the halyard, for example, if a block lets go or whatever. Making sure that the boat is is trimmed down. So as I said, in the symmetricals, it's tweakers down, brace back, sheet on to get the boat under control. In a planing boat, you want to be at full noise going down the wave to unload the apparent wind speed and try and surf onto the wave to depower that low pressure, high pressure thing so that the boat can manoeuvre. Make sure that the main sheet is coming in properly, and when I say properly, as fast as you can. That's literally where you've got to get to. A good helmsman will look straight up the leech and let the leech just flick over the downwind, the eye of the breeze, and that's your safest option. The minute you've got a mainsail still out and halfway through a jibe and a crash, and then you're trying to get runners on, and you're just going to end up completely unstuck. And the one thing that does happen in sailing on a regular basis, once one thing goes wrong, you can be absolutely guaranteed it'll be followed by a complete chain of events. And you know, so it's better off taking your time to set up the plan, set up the process, make sure the communication's clear. I recall one incident with Greenie and an excellent call on the 52. We were expecting a front to come up the coast of New South Wales. We had an A2 or an A4 on, I can't remember exactly. And on the way running towards the cloud, we dropped 2 or 3 reefs in, 2 reefs I think it was, and we set the storm jib up, and literally as the front hit, we just dropped the spinnaker and just straight down the hatch, and everyone got on the rail, and we went to windward in 45, 50 knots. And I'd say that was one of the races that we did very well in, because it was all in the preparedness of setting the boat up.
Yeah, I think I might have been in that race. I think we were on all sorts, and you guys are, you know, looking very, very, very nice. Anyway, yeah, talking of preparation, I'll throw over to Jack. I mean, obviously I've done a few races with you and we've done a lot of prep, but I'd just like you to maybe, you know, talk about that. And also just for the, you know, the audience, we will definitely have a lot of questions. I know I'm asking them now, but we'll you know, we'll cover off questions from the audience as well. Yeah, Jack, just preparation. We're talking about a few things here. I mean, look, some of the things which come to my mind are, you know, when you've got 2 reefs in, being able to see, just being able to literally be able to have the instruments cleared as soon as possible, like the detailed stuff. Can you just go through a few things like that, and, you know, whatever else comes to mind in preparation for you, what you sort of see as being necessary in training?
So preparation for the total moment, not for the manoeuvre?
Well, what are you talking about, the jibe?
Yeah.
So no, I'm just mean like, preparation for racing. So, you know, like we throw Frank overboard to go and work out if we can actually retrieve a person, and obviously we did, he's here. But yeah, like anything like that, just along those lines.
Sure, yeah, well, preparation is key, and across a number of different areas. So if I start with safety being the main one, if I talk specifically to what we've done, we've had Genevieve White give us a 1-day lecture before each Hobart, just to get us sharpen our skills, you know, in sea safety survival. I think I've done it 5 or 6 times over the last 20 years. And it's amazing how much you forget, you know, and even just the colours of flares and all those things. So we do a refresher as a team every year, and it's so valuable in getting your crew aligned with what happens in certain moments, you know, life rafts, numbering off, all these simple things, so that if you spend that time in the lead up to the race, you don't have to think about that during the race, you know, in those moments. It's process, you know, and focusing on the process is the main thing. So I think if you can implement things like that, that you can be really organised with your safety, then do it. It's a no-brainer. And that coincides with the weather and what you're expecting, and thus what manoeuvres you're going to be doing, what sails you're going to be taking, what rolls you're going to be doing, and the boys just talked about it. I mean, having your default rolls is absolutely critical, and if it's in, you know, heavy air downwind jibing, you get into your default rolls and you're trusting those people in those key positions every time. You know, on our boat, Rob was the driver through the jibe every time. I'd go on to the new runner. Parko was on the main. Frankie Boy was in the bow. You know, like we knew what everyone was expecting. Even if I had been driving and I was in the mode, you know, and could do the jibe, you go to your default rolls and you don't break that. And I think that's super key. So you discuss that in your preparation. You know, you go through all the scenarios and the different possibilities with the wind strengths, the sail choices, all those sorts of things. The more you can talk it and discuss it with your team, the more that everyone's on the same page and the less mistakes you make. So for sure, spending time in the room up here if you need it. It's a good little room in here. You get the whiteboard up and you can discuss things and prepare for what's coming up. I think that's absolutely critical. Greenie talked about Billy the Kid, Clinton Evans, in boat preparation. You just have to have everything absolutely smick for a race like the Hobart. If you're going out there with a 5-year-old rope, you're asking for trouble. You've just got to have your boat ship shape. There's no questions about it, and that's what wins races. If you break something and you're not going to get there, and you just have to make sure that, and it's a safety thing, you have to make sure that the boat's 100%. So, whether it be sacrificing a day of training to get on top of your job list, we've had to do that a number of times, with breakages occurring, and then going, okay, well, we're going to sacrifice time out on the water to fix that and get on top of it so that when we do go out, we know it's going to be okay. And so it's, the safety, the boat preparation and weather and going through your roles. I think there's an unlimited amount of stuff that you can do in that regard before you even get on the water, and it's invaluable. And of course, once you get on the water, if you've got the time to go into the extreme conditions, whether it be light or heavy, and going through the potential outcomes and getting time into people that are going to be doing the roles, whether it be the driver, the main sheet trimmer, whatever it is, the more time you can do that, then the better off you're going to be. And we were fortunate last year that we had a smoking southerly and in the Volvo, and we had very limited preparation. We only had really 3 training days. And we went out in 35 knots and really let it rip and got used to managing the boat in those conditions. And I think that set us up for what occurred last year. Without that, it would have been a lot tougher to know, what's going on, whether it be double wrapping the winch so that, a wave doesn't undo that, and, making sure that things are really locked down and you don't have to worry about that stuff. You just have to worry about keeping the boat in the zone, communicating with the key people that are in control of the boat and sailing it to its maximum. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, there's nothing nicer than walking down the dock on Boxing Day knowing that you're fully prepared, like going out to your boat knowing that everything downstairs is right, we know what we're eating, we've got all that sorted, and the boat itself's well found and the crew's trained and, your safety's been addressed. I might just take an opportunity now just to ask questions from the floor, just to sort of... Yeah, sure. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, just to add to that, we've talked. I'm just throwing a couple of comments in that we don't cover off, just to be a devil's advocate, to be honest. But that's so Jack and Greenie have talked about the above deck stuff. There's a lot of below deck stuff that needs to be dealt with as well. And when I say below deck stuff, I'm not just talking about a pot and a pan flying across the galley, potentially with hot water, for example, or naked flames, etc., etc. But I'm talking about things like slippery floorboards. I'm talking about bunks that have not been lashed properly or bolted in properly. In my 30-odd Hobarts, I have seen all of those things happen, and I've seen people thrown out of bunks. I've seen people slide and hurt themselves badly and all of those things. So I'd encourage you to also, when you talk about preparation is down below as well, making sure that the whole entire crew know where the safety gear is. And I'm not just talking the life jackets, I'm talking the emergency rudder system and how that's going to be set up and how you're going to actually, unbolt the cover and how you're going to fit that emergency rudder, because those, it's pretty terrifying when you have to do all those things for the first time. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, you've got 45 knots, it's pissing with rain, it's not much fun. So I think it's really important to make sure that everybody is fully briefed on that process, and I don't think we do that enough.
Yeah, good points. And it's not quite at the level you're saying, but, player comfort is so important. Being able to have a rested crew, hydrated, combating seasickness, and food. And in these conditions, all of those things become extremely difficult to manage. and being able to have a boat where those things are addressed at the start, you know, like not going to become an issue later on. Fatigue is obviously a big factor in lots of the accidents that we're talking about right now, you know, people not being able to perform at their best. And so, I guess following on from what you're saying and saying that that's so important. Yeah, let's have a question from the floor. There must be a few. So, yeah, Tara's going to use the microphone just because on the line we'll need to be able to use this to be able to get to everyone who's dialing in.
Thanks very much for a really great presentation. I'm not fortunate to own a boat that's quite as quick as the boats that you sail. It tends to have the waves coming from behind faster than the boat travels. And not only that, it's a centre-boarder with quite a shallow rudder. And I really like Jack's description of the rhythm and getting into the rhythm of going downwind. One of the things with my boat is if you're not square on to the wave coming up from behind when it hits, the rudder comes out of the water and you're sort of lost. But you're going very square, and there's always the risk that you're going to do an unexpected jibe. And I guess that's sort of the theme of tonight with the 2 fatalities. How do you best manage that risk? How do you try and sort of stop yourself from doing an unexpected jibe, or do you just prepare for it and make sure that no one's in the way?
So the first thing I'd say about that situation and the recommendations that I'd be putting forward is I'd use the term sculling waves, if that makes sense. So going straight down a wave is, they say it's going down into the mine, and going straight up a wave, you potentially are going to launch the boat straight through it. So, but sculling the waves is basically putting the bow down, increasing your apparent wind speed. That'll help balance the boat out, and you won't be fighting the rudder as much. And then come across the wave a little bit more, and then repeat that. And a lot of that is feeling, because you're quite right. In a small boat, the rudder will come out of the water. All that low pressure that I keep talking about, the mast goes forward down the wave, just like a windsurfer. The low pressure continues on. You've got to try and balance out those low pressures out as much as possible in that sense. It's equally going upwind in heavy air. I'd use the same term as sculling. So going up a wave and then peeling off at the top to port or starboard, depending on what tack. One of the interesting parts that we had in 98, and I won't go into too many 98 stories, but we were very small in our sail area. We had a trysail and a storm jib for a lot of the time, and eventually even got down to straight storm jib. And what we were finding was there was actually no wind at the bottom of the waves. So we didn't have enough horsepower to go up the wave and then scull the boat off the top of the wave. So it's that fine balance between, and I'm not telling you what sails you should have up, but it's that fine balance between horsepower to get up the wave and then being able to peel off the back. And small boats, displacement boats particularly, are quite characteristic of those issues.
Yeah, looking at the report, Flying Fish Actros, they had jibed, and you probably might be familiar with the report, but they'd done their jibe, and then they were trying to go wing on wing with the jib, and that was where they had another accidental jibe, which was obviously had a terrible consequence. It must be very hard to get into that wing on wing, which is very depowered type of sail plan. To try and then pole out the headsail on the other side, because you've got to almost go by the lee to get that to happen. Is that a safe approach? What do you think?
No, it's not a safe approach. The whole situation, and as I say, I come back to now the 70s and the 80s when I was sailing these style of boats, and I can sympathise with you. I happened to sail a 41-foot Peterson. It was as narrow at the back as it was at the front. 30 seconds before you wiped out, you knew you were going to wipe out, but you just didn't know which way. The things that we used to do to prevent it, and which is one of the things I think you asked, how do you minimise the damage? How do you stop people being knocked around. First of all, we had a rule on the board the boat. If somebody screamed, hit the deck, you hit the deck and you forgot about the boat. Get yourself below anything that's going to happen. What we used to do is have preventers. 3. One on the boom, one going from the bow, the tack position, back to the snotter position on the mast where the spinnaker pole was, so that if you actually dug your boom or your spinnaker pole into the water, because they actually became your second rudder as the boat starts to roll. Now, as far as poling out a jib, never go to leeward. The jib pole should be set up with your brace and spinnaker system. Put your jib sheet through the end of the pole and wind it out to the pole. You do not pull your boat away and try and get your sail out there. If the pole is then locked into position by its kicker, by a brace, if you do wipe out to windward, you can fire your jib sheet, the sail goes through, no pole goes forward. If, for example, then you do a Chinese jibe, which is the worst thing that can happen to you, your boat rolls into windward, your pole acts as a big oar, and you have half a chance to come back. You've got to use your spars as second rudders. Does that help? Number 1, use your spinnaker system to get your poles out. Now, if you do a jibe all standing with a pole out there, pick your speed, flip your main over, pull your jib sheet on, lower your spinnaker pole, bring it out the other side, set it up, and then when you're ready to come away, your brace and your pole is already in position, wind your jib sheet out to it. Never pull away.
I just want to support Greenie in that one. That's actually the order that it should be done. And I think we quite often make mistakes with the order that it should be done. So it's mainsail first, pole up the mast, sheet on, or that equivalent of that, and then set up your new pole. Not trying to do the jib first by any means.
So you mentioned wiping out, recovery from a broach, recovery from the boat's tipped in. Going Greenie, you were talking there about symmetric boat. Is there anything else on symmetrics that, ways of getting yourself out of that position, like when the boat's laid over, what's the go?
Well, first of all, I think Brownie mentioned it before. Everybody, the first thing they try to do is to move the wheel, the tiller, over as far as they can to prevent it, and you get cavitation out. Look, eventually the boat will come up. Just be patient.
Usually when the wind drops down to that 25 knots.
The thing is, you've got to look after yourself and your crew first. Just settle on the deck. It's not going to go anywhere. If you've done your right thing, you've got your hatches closed, everything's fairly watertight there, it'll come back. Just be patient.
A trick that can be used. A lot of people don't use it, but it can be used, and it's different for asymmetrical than symmetrical. But if the boat took longer than you wanted it to come up, right, what I'd encourage you to do is I'd encourage you to sheet on as hard as you possibly can, and I'd encourage you to ease the halyard. And if you do that and you've got a tight foot, what'll happen is the spinnaker will actually float above the water and for quite a considerable amount of time until such point you can get the boat away. Once you've got the boat away, then you ease the sheet and you go halyard up. And if you want to keep a spinnaker up by that stage, you can re-enjoy your spinnaker. But if you decide not to do that, then that sheet just comes in under the boom and you get rid of the kite. But quite often what you'll see in one design racing, for example, Etchells, where they haven't laid a leeward mark of some description, or even on the skiffs, and they'll just strap the foot of the kite absolutely bone tight and dump the halyard, and it allows the boat to go to windward.
Fraught with danger.
It's definitely fraught with danger, but it is a solution than 24 hours on on your side.
And Jack, on the sort of, almost regular occasions of tipping in a symmetric boat, well, when I say that, like once a race, every now and then, but how are we managing that? Everything's on its side, and how are we getting out of it?
Thanks, Sam. Yep, I've wiped out Sam's boat a couple of times. Coming back to what I was talking about earlier, the angle at which you're going into the back of the wave in front of you is critical. So, talking about crash jibing, if you flatten off too much and go, I'm going to go fast, that is fraught with danger, because that's where you enter the wave too flat and you lose grip. And I was thinking about your question before. Grip, knowing the limits of grip on your boat is really important. So in terms of what happened last year in the 70, we had a lot of wind was building through the night, and Rob was behind. He was sailing master. I was driving a fair bit in the night with Luke Parkinson. We were tag teaming out, and Rob was checking in with me regularly, saying, "You under control? You happy? You feel safe?" And it's an honest feedback loop system that you've got to give, because it's it's the safety of the team. And so for most of the time I was, I'm feeling good, feeling safe. We had the A5 on, we had 2 reefs, and everything was under control. And then, at 3 a.m. in the morning...
The boat's going how fast?
It was 30 knots, over 30 knots. But, going fast, I think, is somewhat safer at times than going slow. So it's knowing what the boat likes to be doing and, keeping in that groove and not slowing up too much, not overdriving. But anyway, which is typical of the east coast of Australia, a rogue wave with no back on it popped up, and I said, "Oh shit," and Rob said, "Oh big shit," and planted it in the back of the wave in front. But I was really focused on the angle that I went into the back of the wave, so I was prepared for it. So I actually had a bit of leeward heel. I was, very focused on that angle of heel. So 12 degrees on the 70 is about right. So I went into the wave at the right angle and knew that as soon as we planted it in and, a wave over the gooseneck came barrelling down the deck, I knew we weren't going to crash jibe in that moment. And then it comes down to your trimmers releasing the sails as quickly as possible, deloading the boat, and, you'd lose grip. I was told by Frank, actually, at the back of the room that we reversed out of the wave. And the boat slowly laid on its side, and, staying calm is really important, as Greenie was alluding to. You just got to accept that you're in that situation, let the sails go, straighten your wheels, get the grip going, get the flow going, and then turn down and get going. And it took me 2 goes, and off we went again. And so it does happen, and it happens, and it's that limit of what performance are you doing? Are you pushing really hard? Do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? It's a question that you've, got the little man on your shoulder, do you feel safe? Am I doing the right thing? But it still happens. So,
and I guess also with the sort of, boats with runners, if you do have a crash jibe or you're an accidental jibe, you're pinned. You're in all sorts. It's such a crucial situation to avoid. And that's where rigs get lost and everything, of course. Are we still interested in sailing? Is anyone actually just tapping out of the sport right now? Kind of get to that point, it's like, oh my God, it's such a hectic thing to do, isn't it? Another question from the floor, please. We'll come to you.
Yes, thank you. We've talked a lot about crash jibes. Is there any time you consider doing a granny?
Twice in 44. It's basic seamanship, There are times when the experience and you have to make that decision as your skipper. There's nothing wrong with doing a granny. It's just, in some cases, the preparation from the granny and coming out of it can actually be more dangerous than a jibe. You just got to remember that there are opportunities. One full turn to a 180 turn has got to increase the danger factor.
I don't encourage a granny with a spinnaker up.
I think we've got another question here.
Yeah, Sam, you mentioned runners. I was just wondering if you've got reefs in your main, would you need to have the runners up? I mean,
Yeah, it's definitely a good point. I mean, often, boats when they're running hard downwind will go to, both reefs in, get the main down below the runners so you can jibe without worrying about the runners. You can have them both on. So there's definitely a way of making it safer, one that we do. And to be honest, that can actually be quite a good way to jibe even and not really heavy air. You could be doing that when you're really just one reef, or even in other circumstances it could be considered as well. Do you guys want to add to that?
No, it's just basically the setup. Whether you're two reef mainsail system, 3 reefs, definitely a 2-runner jibe is the way to go. On Quest, we never really got down hard running with 2 reefs. The simple fact that we had more spring than most of the other 52s, and we could push the boat a lot harder. But I have on the Volvo 70s with Matty Allen done a 2-runner jibe, no problem at all.
There we go. For those of us who have like a production boat, heavy production boat, with symmetrical spinnakers, I think Greenie mentioned that he prefers preventers on older style boats. What's your opinion? There was a lot of debate in the report. We prefer it. We've made a judgment call that we'd rather break a boom than have a accidental jibe.
I think preventers are a great idea. The way we set the boat up, especially on the boom preventer, was that it would break before the boom. It was actually set up. The initial Chinese or roll to windward, you don't want the boom coming across if you can avoid it. So, but you want it to actually, the preventer to snap so that the boom will actually come over once you're in that position. So, the boom break or something like that, I'm not a fan of those, but certainly a preventer on the boom I think is essential in those sorts of breezes, going back to the boats I sailed then.
I'm not going to give you advice on preventers or not preventers. I think that's a captain's decision. What I am going to say though is that, and a lot of people don't realise this, but once again, from a physics point of view, if you move the main sheet from the end of the boom to the mid boom, you are encouraging a breakage twice as fast, double the load. So if that preventer is coming in at mid boom, and you have a boom that's designed for end boom sheeting, you are running the risk of breaking a boom, without a doubt. So in all the I think Jack and Greenie would support me 100% that in every jibe you want to get the main sheet centred. You want to make sure the traveller is centred and locked off. Another issue that people don't do. It's all very well centering the main sheet, but then all of a sudden the traveller swings across, and in some of the wider boats, quite a distance. But that I just encourage you to think about that, where that boom sheeting comes from, particularly with some of the cruising boats where you've got mid-sheet boom sheeting even across the cabin top. So just be aware of that.
You mentioned boom brakes. Not a fan. Any reason you want to talk that through?
Well, I think they're just another weapon to hit somebody. It's as simple as that. They're not very fast going upwind either. They're a lot of windage. As an aesthetics point of view, that's the way I go. I just think that a preventer that's load tested so that it will break before the boom is a lot safer. A boom brake will only slow it down. At least with a preventer on, you know that the boom is still going to be out to port or to starboard where it started when you're in the water, and it will come back through later.
It's obviously something which I think some boats do run them and like using them. Is there anyone running boom brakes in the audience? Want to make a comment on it?
Yeah, I run mine back
Andrew?
through clutches. I can actually use it as a preventer. I run mine back through clutches to the deck where I'm two-hander. We have the which are jibe easy, so it's not that big clunky thing you're referring to. We run it back down through some blocks, back down to the helm position. I can tension the tension on the boom brake from my helm position, and it just buys me a little bit of time to catch it, being two-handed, to get it back under control before it comes across. If it comes across, this is a 40-footer, by the way. It's not not a big boat, but we found it actually invaluable on the two-handers to have the Wishart jibe easy there, that we can tension from the helm position and just slow that whole thing down to buy a bit more time when you're on the helm by yourself. We don't have the luxury of trimmers. We just have to give ourselves a bit more time to sort of get back up to a better angle. So for the smaller boats, I think they're a very good idea. It's to your point, it's not on the end of the boom, it's right where the vang is, so we don't have that bending moment. In the report, there's a photo of how I've set it up, and I'd encourage the smaller boats to really consider that, especially the two-handers.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point, that when you're a double-hander, it's your setup may be different, but it's something for every boat to consider how they want to set up their boat, and then train and practice with it, and obviously get the technical advice on how it is set up. It's so important to get it right, because you don't want to be, like you say, the preventer's too strong and the boom's just going to break, because that's going to be another catastrophic event. Tara, is there any questions online that we want to... I mean, the online people could ask questions as well, and I think we have another one at the back.
Yes, Brownie raised the point of steep swells. Is there a particular angle that you target to the line of the swells when you've got a high chance of actually torpedoing into the back of the swell in front of you? Is there an angle to that you find optimum in terms of approaching it? You're coming down the face of the one swell, you're about to go, well and truly going to go ploughing into the back of the next one. Is there an optimum sort of angle?
I think it's depends on the boat that you've got, and how much form stability you've got in the hull, and the grip limits that you've got. So if I speak specifically to our boats, we have very wide, powerful hull shapes. So, you can rely on that stability and the grip levels. So we would, and as I was saying before, the angle of heel that from memory was about 12 degrees, I felt safe. But that might differ from an IOR boat and other vessels. So for me, there's a bit of intuition with your own boat and knowing where that safe zone is with grip, and what you feel like you can, when it loads up, if you give the sheets a bit of an ease, you can get through. You can allow the boat, give it what it needs to get through. So, yeah, 12 degrees. That's the answer.
If I can just add to that, really, it would be a very strange day that the wind and the waves are lining themselves up so that there is a perfect answer to that. Again, we've spoken about angle of heel, feel of the boat. Usually, and with God's given senses, you'll know at the top of the wave what the best way to do it is. You just feel the angle that you've got to go at. Because the last thing you want to be doing is a nor'east swell and a northerly breeze and suddenly realising that you're 15, 20 degrees the wrong side of that angle. So angle of heel is important. It will tell you when it's time to go.
I think we're talking also about, sense and being able to see things and feel things, and obviously see the waves and so forth to some extent. I mean, sometimes all you've got is the loom from the navigational lights and there's just nothing else there, and you just have to have feel. But one thing that you do often have to rely upon is the instruments. And, calibrating instruments for downwind sailing is different to calibration for upwind sailing. You need to have both calibration tables in there, in my experience, especially with some of the boats that I've been sailing on. With the upwash, whether you've got one reef in or two, how much it's affecting things like your wind angles that are being displayed. And that's hugely important when you get to low visibility and when you get to these, fatigue stages, and you've got that ability to have the main sheet and the headsail trimmer or the kite trimmer talking back to the helmsman about what numbers they've got. What are your numbers? Where are you at? Someone mentioned also in the report about compasses, and we're using digital compass displays, and again, being able to make sure that you just sense checking what you're actually doing using the compass, the wind angle. Comments on that, guys?
hard running, I never use a compass. It's as simple as that. Why are you looking at something that's useless?
I was in the report, so I'm just mentioning it.
Sam, could I just come back to Bruce's question about the angle of heel into the wave? If that's right, Bruce, is that sort of the question? I guess one of the... Yeah, so the first thing is to diagnose sea state from swell, and they are two different animals. So sea state is wind and chop and a bit of wave motion, and swell is the leftover swell of a storm or a local region. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that if you were to, what they call sort of bury the bow, if you were to go into the back of a wave, at a bare minimum you want to be able to pull out to windward. You don't want to pull out to leeward. So at a bare minimum you want to be able to turn the helm up, not down, because otherwise you're going to end up in a bit of a pickle. So I always go into a wave, and quite often I'll look up at the Windex and make sure, even if I'm very square, that I can peel the boat out to windward of the wave.
Thanks, Brownie.
So we've got a couple questions online, particularly about your process going into a jibe and coming out, and what you kind of your step-by-steps. We've talked a lot about how you guys prepare for a jibe and then go through it, and having the main sheet all the way in, your trav centred. But if we could just go through the step-by-step process of how you guys would approach that, that would be fantastic.
Step by step, jibe, okay. Well, I think, and in relation to heavy air downwind being the theme, getting everyone on deck and in their gear, and that's like full attire, not in your jammies. Having, your harness on and being clipped on, and having the boat still going at 100% as best as you can. So keeping clear of the guys that are in control of the people that are in control of the boat, and allowing them to maintain the performance, keep it, on rails. And then default positions. So knowing exactly what you're going in to do, who's your partner, if you're on the pumps, if you're on the runner, whatever your role is, making sure that you're ready to get in there and do your job when the sailing master or skipper is ready. So our process would be have everyone on deck, and Greenie said it earlier, but probably behind the driver, and just with the trimmers forward of them, and then the driver saying, okay, there's a good few waves coming up, get into your positions, and they'll usually say, looking for the right wave, okay, this one's good, and then it's about getting onto the wave, turning down now, and then it's, a process of getting the main in. It's all hands on the main, fundamentally. And the trimmer on the spinnaker, we do outside jibes most of the time in those conditions. On the boats that we've sailed, you could sometimes furl, but we choose to go around the front, and essentially the trimmers are managing that while everyone else is in on the main. New runner comes on, a very loud call from runner maid, which is pretty critical, and that allows the leeward runner to be eased and the main to be eased as you coming out through the jibe. And then everyone clicks into trimming on the spinnaker. So it's an orchestra of, and directed by the skipper, whoever's driving the boat, on getting on that wave, getting some pace, making sure you've got a bit of a surf on so that you can turn with speed. That deloads the main. It allows you to do things with a bit more ease and comfort. So communication's absolutely key. Staying in your default roles, keeping the boat moving fast. Don't crash jibe. Don't force the manoeuvre. Wait for the right wave, and clear communication.
What he said.
Yeah, so symmetrical's a bit different. The first part is all identical in that everybody's up on deck and in key positions. But then fundamentally what you want to do is you want to get the boat under control. And if you want to go fast, you'll ease the sails. But if you want to get the boat under control and slow it down so you've kind of can set it up for the jibe, you actually want to strap everything on a bit. So it's tweakers down, pole back sheet on, and clear communication. Then it's actually bringing the main in. A lot of people don't realise, but quite often there's 2 winches on a main sheet as well. So if you want to get that main sheet in quickly, there's no reason why you can't use two main sheet winches. So it comes in at twice the speed. Your most dangerous section, I guess, of that jibe is when the main's only in a quarter of the way and you haven't got enough helm grip to hold the boat, and she gets a bit unstable and you run the risk of winding on. So when you go to decide to jibe, that main's got to come on. As Jack said, picking the wave to do that. If you pick a wave and you are sort of surfing, at least going down a wave, you are decreasing the power in the sail by default. You are decreasing the apparent, and therefore the boat should be unloaded. Okay, so then you want to get the main into centre, and obviously looking up at the Windex, look at the leech and just let the leech fall through, and then let the main sheet out at the same time with the obviously with the spinnaker pole is a different setup. So I would actually be encouraging you to depower the boat by flattening the gear before the jibe, and then picking a good wave, and then go through the jibe process.
Hey, Brownie. So, Brownie, do you depower the main by easing the vang as well?
The answer is yes, but what is important there is, once again, keeping an eye on the forces that are going to drive the mast forward. So I certainly wouldn't have all the vang off, if that makes sense. I'd certainly depower the vang, definitely, but I wouldn't have it all off. Go back to that sailboard scenario where the mast goes forward and the whole centre of effort comes over the top of the rig. Particularly if you're going slow, and particularly if you've got a small rudder that can't counteract that, that's where the boat's going to roll over on its forequarter and fall over.
I've got another good one online just about, in a lot of our races, you might have a lot of experienced people on board and some people with not as much experience. So when we do get into these sort of conditions, how do you manage those different levels on board, and how do you manage your crew there? And also importantly, how do you still build their experience? So down the line, they are the ones on board with experience, and we can keep growing our crew base and our sport.
Yeah, so one of the other, sorry, that's a good question, I'll come back to that, but also in the jibe process, speaking of inexperienced crew or even experienced crew, but weight low in the boat too, okay? And one of the things I see a lot in cruising boats, displacement type boats, is people sitting on the coaming, going through a manoeuvre, and if the boat does go sideways, there's a high chance that you've got a 6 to 8 foot drop, and you've got a very high chance of going straight through the middle lifeline. So I encourage, which sort of leads into Tara's question, the less experienced people, obviously in less role than the experienced people. And having said that, how do they learn? I've got to tell you, the best time to learn is when they're not racing. So that's more time on the water in a casual environment where you can explain things, explain the theory. One of my favourite things that I encourage people new to the sport to do is actually do deliveries, because those are the opportunities where you get to actually steer a boat or feel the helm of a boat. There's a high chance that an inexperienced person will never touch the helm in a yacht race. So get them to do the delivery. The deliveries are generally in good weather. You can be unlucky, but generally speaking, they're in good weather. But I would encourage as many people who want to do offshore racing to do the deliveries with some of these crews.
Anything to add there, guys?
Brownie, can I ask a question? Symmetric kite versus asymmetric kite hold out. Is there any significant difference for a heavy displacement boat? Sorry, did you hear that? Yeah, just in terms of symmetric versus asymmetric, with poling out, downwind, heavy displacement boats, like, is there any significant advantages or disadvantages of using either?
Some people may disagree, but this is my theory anyway. The asymmetrical spinnaker is generally bigger than the mainsail itself. So there is no reason why you can't goose wing the asymmetrical spinnaker which means you keep the horsepower on the boat and then bring the main in because the main will be depowered. So, and that would be quite a controlled jibe in that particular situation. Just because, but that's a displacement boat. That is, I just want to make it very clear, that's not a planing boat, that's a displacement boat. But certainly goose wing the spinnaker, run square, goose wing the asymmetrical spinnaker. That means the horsepower is still on the boat, decreasing the apparent on the mainsail, and then the main should come across a lot easier.
Sounds like it needs a bit of expertise to get that one right.
Yeah, sure, practice makes perfect.
To add to that question, I think what you're saying is that you obviously are running symmetricals, is that correct? Yeah. The thing to remember with symmetricals is that the movement, how they move around. The thing with the big wide heads they have on them, in heavy air, what you've got to do is, as the wind gets stronger, to lower your pole further. And to the point where it may be halfway between your light air running position and your heavy air, which would almost be at your gooseneck, is where I would run a symmetrical in heavy airs. The sheet, then we talked about the tweakers. We actually used to use the brace position, so we're up near the stays to hold that sheet. And unlike a symmetrical, when you go down waves or the boat starts to get out of control, an assy, you'll ease the sheet to lift the bow. On a symmetrical, you should pull your sheet on to actually close the head and get your control back. To add to jibing with a symmetrical before, one of the tricks we used to use, unlike Brownie's system of bringing the main sheet on, we found that it was vitally important that even a boat that's only doing 8 to 9 knots as compared to a TP52, as most probably doing 20 plus in that, is that you go down the waves, but that 9 knots is vital that you are actually doing that sort of pace so that your rudder is working. We used to ignore the spinnaker. We wouldn't put the bowman in the bow. And because we've got the spinnaker so low, we would actually go down the wave, jibe the mainsail, ease that out, and after we were settled, we would then send somebody forward to fire the pole and bring the pole forward and through. You know, even if the spinnaker is flapping, because you've got the sheets on so tight and you've lowered it, all it is just a flag on a pennant. So it's not going to do any damage to you. So lower the pole, lower your sheet and pull it on.
We've got time for just one more question.
Just on the pole, if you know this, forgive me, but if the shoulder of the kite, the head area of the kite is furling first, it means your pole's too high. If the bottom section of the kite is furling first, it means the pole's too low. So when you're trimming a spinnaker and you're trying to, what Greeny's saying is, you're sort of racing away and you want to flatten that kite. That's where you've got to be. So it's so that furling is not occurring.
Just an observation, see if you agree, but obviously in a crash jibe situation, being aware of the height of the boom is important and keeping your head down. My observation is that when people have a reef in, they're not nearly as aware of the height of the boom. It might be a height that's lower, and particularly if reefing lines have a couple of foot that haven't been wound in tight, the boom can be dangerously low. Just an observation.
Yeah, maybe some comment just on downwind reefing, just quickly.
Put tracks on the mast.
And for those which never did that, Jack, what do you reckon?
Good one, Greenie. Yeah, downwind reefing can be really tricky. So deloading the main is where you can come unstuck, and knowing how to do what's called a blowback. So making sure the main flaps off the stays or the rig and using your front sail to, guide the pressure from that onto your mainsail, to give it a flap to deload it so that you can either get it off the lock or start getting it down. So it is an art form, particularly if you don't have a boom topping lift as well. Then you're using your reef lines to keep the boom off the wheel or the lifelines and things like that. So again, it comes back to your teamwork and your roles and relying on each other and the communication that you've got in those moments and saying, hold, I'm not quite there on the outboard end, or, hold, I need to get the inboard end down first. So, I think the trickiest part, particularly when it's really windy and trying to reef, is deloading it first and then getting the tack sorted out and not loading the leech too much, otherwise you can blow the main up. Getting that symphony right, again, is practice. And getting out there and doing it slowly and communicating and working out those sweet spots, marking all your sheets. It's the simple stuff, just having the accurate marks so that you can go 3, 2, 1, and we're there, and then making sure that it's either on the lock or at the right spot if you've got a 2-to-1 reefing system or whatever it is. So, deload, don't rush, communicate well, and keep the boom off the wheel.
To be a little bit more serious about it, but exactly what Jack has said. We don't take advantage of practice time, and we should be practicing all this stuff before a major race, whether we're doing the Blue Water series with the CYCA, which is, I think, the best practice, but getting out there and actually practicing these things. We do it every year. We go out and we practice reefing, downwind, practicing, getting out there, and it's not a situation, it's blowing 20 knots, we don't think we'll go out and practice today, what are we going to learn? That's the time you should be out there learning.
Great, well look, we've got time for one more question. Okay, got one from the...
Just one more from online. I think this is quite a good one, particularly given last year's Hobart. I know we had at least one double-handed boat that made the decision to retire because of the conditions, based on their own fatigue levels, but what would your considerations be in that weather? Have you ever got to a stage where you're looking at the crew saying maybe we shouldn't keep racing? I know everyone's very competitive and they're in these races. They put a lot of money and time into competing. But at what point are you guys considering maybe it is your best decision to go into port or to take a break? And what can you do in those situations?
Go to you, Adam.
This is a subject that's very dear to my heart, because in 1998, this is exactly what happened. We were doing well, and that was the good part. But I think Sammy's here, one of my crewmates, and a couple of others. But what was actually happening was the crew were getting tired, really, really fatigued. We had I can't remember, Sammy, over 120 years of Hobart experience on the boat. Very, very talented crew, and they were fatigued. They were tired. And even in some cases, seasickness had crept in. Everyone has their own version of why seasickness occurs, but I truly believe it's nerves as well. And seasickness started to kick in, and we looked at the weather for a considerable amount of time and tried to work out what the best solution was to that situation. We were roughly 40 miles into the strait and 40 miles west of New South Wales, or Victoria I should say. So we had only just entered the strait, and we knew that in those conditions we were up for another couple of days of this, and that was really the telling point of why we made the decision and to turn around. And so we went through the process, we deliberated, we consoled, we condensed, we spoke to the owner, we literally consulted everybody to make sure that everybody was on the same page. We went through a very formal briefing process as to how we were going to turn around. Engine on, sails ready, all crew up on deck, ready to go. We turned the corner, and actually we went back towards Eden, and there was a fair bit of stress relief, humour, laughter, lots of talks about smokes and beers at the Eden Hotel, and a bit of relief. Maybe and we'll never really know, but probably one of the worst decisions we could have made, potentially, because we took our eye off the ball in the sense that the people that were fatigued and seasick got up and helmed because they wanted to feel better. They probably weren't probably weren't feeling the best at the time. There was a lot of communication about managing the boat back to Eden and making sure that we were on the right angle to the swell. That discussion happened numerous times. And sure enough, through a combination of fatigue, unluckiness, and probably lack of planning, we got sideways on a wave and rolled the boat, and that was the end result. So, you know, like when you make those decisions, I think you should be racing back to port just like you're racing the boat, and don't get into cruise mode. Don't worry about the kettle until you're back in port. Yeah, you've got to get you're still not out of trouble until you close the heads.
Thanks, Adam. I think that that's a really good time to finish. It's 8 o'clock as it is. Thank you everyone for attending. Thanks all those online. It's been a really good evening. I feel like we got a lot out of it, a lot of information there. So thank you so much, Adam Brown, Jack Macartney, Mike Green. Thank you.